The universe, in all its vast complexity, has a surprisingly straightforward approach to bureaucracy. Forms must be filed in triplicate, meetings must run precisely 17 minutes too long, and coffee, or whatever gelatinous equivalent your species consumes, must always taste slightly worse than you remember. Such is the way of things across the 17 sentient species of the Galactic Concordat. Among the many laws that bind these species together in what optimists call peace, and realists call mutually assured economic inconvenience, is Statute 7B.0.3, the protection of juvenile life forms during armed conflict. The statute is considered one of the Concordat's greatest achievements, right after the invention of self-cleaning space toilets and just before the standardization of interstellar highway rest stop vending machines. In simple terms, the law states, no sapient being shall engage in military training, conscription, or combat until they have reached the biological maturity threshold of their species. Straightforward enough for most. The Vrul don't reach maturity until their fourth molting cycle. The Tisari aren't considered adults until they've completed their metamorphosis from the aquatic to terrestrial phase. The G don't mature until they've consumed their 17th ceremonial feast of fermented root vegetables and recorded their first tax return. Humans, however, were problematic. But do you mean it's complicated? Asked Ambassador Zixtaral, their 4 eye stalks vibrating with irritation. The Concordat Compliance Committee had convened specifically to address this issue, and the human representative, a square-jawed individual with an impressively symmetrical arrangement of facial hair, was being infuriatingly vague. The human cleared his throat. Ambassador, I simply mean that our definition of maturity encompasses multiple factors including biological, legal, and societal considerations that vary by region, culture, and historical context. Spare me your anthropological dissertation, Zixtaral gurgled, a sign of deep Morbidian frustration. Our monitoring drones have detected what appear to be juvenile humans participating in military exercises. This is a direct violation of Statute 7B.0.3. A holographic display flickered to life in the center of the chamber, showing rows of human younglings marching in formation, operating rudimentary projectile weapons, and navigating obstacle courses while adult humans barked instructions at them. The younglings wore identical uniforms with various insignia and carried themselves with unmistakable military bearing. The human representative barely glanced at the display. Ah, I see the confusion. Those aren't child soldiers. They're cadets. Cadets, repeated Zixtaral, the universal translator, struggling with the term. Define. Students at military academies or training programs. They're learning discipline, leadership, and yes, some military skills. But they're not actual soldiers. The entire committee chamber erupted in a cacophony of translated outrage. The G'd representatives' bioluminescent spots flashed in alarm patterns. The Tisari delegates' gill flaps extended to their full warning position. Even the normally placid Vrul representatives' antennae curled into tight spirals, a sign of extreme skepticism. Zixtaral's voice cut through the noise. This appears to be a transparent semantic evasion of our most sacred law, and thus began humanity's most creative exercise in intergalactic rules law lawyering, since they convinced the Concordat that chocolate wasn't technically a psychoactive substance, despite what it did to Vrul physiology. The Concordat inspection vessel, Regulatory Compliance, entered Earth orbit with all the enthusiasm of an auditor arriving at an all-you-can-eat buffet of tax irregularities. Aboard was a special investigative team led by Chief Inspector Naz Baroth of the Jade, whose species' natural talent for spotting loopholes made them the Concordat's preferred bureaucrats. We will conduct a thorough investigation of these cadet facilities, Naz Baroth announced as the shuttle descended toward Earth. Remember, we are looking for evidence that would classify these juveniles as soldiers. Under Statute 7B.0.3, the first facility on their list was the Van Richter Space Academy in what humans called Colorado. The shuttle landed on a designated pad where a delegation of humans awaited. At the front stood a human female with short gray hair and enough medals on her chest to suggest she'd either had an illustrious military career or was extremely good at winning carnival games. "Welcome to Earth, Inspector," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm Admiral Chen, Superintendent of Van Richter Academy. We're delighted to demonstrate our full compliance with Concordat regulations." Nasboroth's bioluminescent spots flickered skeptically. "We shall see." The tour began in what the humans called classrooms, where juvenile humans sat at desks learning about mathematics, science, literature, and history. Disappointingly normal. However, Nasboroth noted that the history lessons seemed disproportionately focused on battles and military strategies. "Is all human education so fixated on warfare?" the inspector asked. Admiral Chen smiled. "We believe in learning from the past. Would you prefer our cadets remain ignorant of the consequences of conflict?" Next came the physical training areas, where the young humans engaged in various forms of exertion that looked suspiciously like combat preparation. "This obstacle course appears designed to simulate battlefield conditions," observed Tikal, the Tassari assistant inspector, her gill flaps pulsating with suspicion. "It builds strength, endurance, and problem-solving skills," Admiral Chen countered smoothly. "Qualities valuable in any profession." They observed juvenile humans disassembling and reassembling projectile weapons with practiced efficiency. "And I suppose this teaches mathematics?" Nasboroth's spots flashed sarcastically. "Hand-eye coordination, mechanical comprehension, and attention to detail," the Admiral replied without missing a beat. "Additionally, these are sporting equipment, not military hardware. They appear identical to your military's standard-issue rifles," Tikal noted. "Many things share appearances while serving different functions," Admiral Chen observed philosophically. "Like how your gill flaps resemble a Terran accordion, yet produce significantly less pleasing music." Tikal's gill flaps snapped shut in what might have been embarrassment. As the tour continued, a pattern emerged. Every activity that appeared military in nature was explained away as educational, character building, or recreational. The cadets practiced marksmanship for visual acuity development. They trained in hand-to-hand combat for physical education and self-defense. They studied orbital bombardment calculations for applied astrophysics. By day's end, the inspection team had toured 3 different academies and heard variations of the same explanations at each. They retreated to their shuttle to compare notes. "They are clearly training these juveniles for military service," insisted Nasboroth, spots flashing in agitation. "Yet they have not technically violated the statute," countered Bex, the Virul legal analyst. "The younglings are not actively engaged in combat, nor have they been conscripted into military service. The humans are exploiting a definitional gap," Tikal agreed. "The statute prohibits military training for juveniles, but doesn't specify what constitutes military training versus education with military applications." Nasboroth's spots dimmed in resignation. "We need more evidence. Tomorrow we interview the cadets themselves. Perhaps they will be less creative with the truth than their instructors." The diplomatic conference room aboard the regulatory compliance had been prepared to accommodate human physiological needs. Gravity set to Earth standard, temperature at a toasty 22 degrees Celsius, and the air mixture adjusted to the peculiar nitrogen-oxygen blend humans somehow hadn't managed to poison themselves with. Yet, seated across from the inspection team was a group of 5 human cadets, ranging in apparent age from early to late adolescence. They wore their formal uniforms and sat with impeccable posture, expression serious but not intimidated. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with us," Nasboroth began. "We wish to understand your experiences as cadets directly from you." The oldest-looking cadet, whose uniform indicated leadership status, nodded. "We're happy to assist with interspecies understanding, Inspector. That's part of why we're here, to build better relations with our galactic neighbors." "Indeed." Nasboroth's spots flickered skeptically. "Let us begin with a simple question. Why did you choose to attend a military academy? I want to serve on diplomatic missions in space, answered the leader cadet. The academy offers the best exobiology and xenolinguistics programs on Earth. Another cadet spoke up. My family has a tradition of public service, and the academy provides unparalleled leadership training. My interest is in aerospace engineering, said a third. There's no better place to learn spacecraft design. Each answer was frustratingly reasonable, as if they'd been rehearsed for maximum plausible deniability. Call leaned forward, gill flaps extended in what humans might interpret as curiosity, but was actually an aggressive interrogation posture. You are learning to use weapons, are you not? We learn firearm safety and marksmanship as part of our comprehensive education, the leader cadet replied smoothly. Just as we learn calculus, xenohistory, and 4 non-human languages. Would you be willing to use those weapons in combat? Nasbaroth asked directly. We're not authorized for combat deployment until we graduate and reach military service age, the leader cadet explained. That's 18 standard Earth years, which our government has registered as our species' maturity threshold with the Concordat. So you are being prepared for eventual military service, Vex observed, antennae unfurling in triumph. We're being prepared for numerous career paths, countered another cadet. Many graduates pursue scientific research, diplomatic corps positions, or space exploration. Military service is just one option. The questioning continued for hours, but the cadets maintained their composure and their story. They were students, not soldiers. They were learning, not training. They were preparing for possible futures, not inevitable military service. When the session ended and the cadets departed, the inspection team was left with mounting frustration. They've been thoroughly coached, fumed Nasbaroth, or perhaps they believe what they're saying, suggested Vex. The distinction between education and indoctrination can be subtle. We need to see these cadets in an uncontrolled situation, Tikal said. Their true nature will emerge when they're not performing for us. As if the universe itself had a flair for dramatic timing, the ship's communication system chimed with an urgent message from Earth. The emergency alert came from a research outpost in Antarctica, where scientists from multiple species studied Earth's climate. A sudden storm had damaged critical systems, and several researchers were trapped in a collapsing facility with oxygen supplies dwindling. The regulatory compliance was the closest vessel with rescue capabilities, but the storm's electromagnetic interference made transporter technology unusable. A physical rescue mission would be necessary, in conditions that were extreme even by Antarctic standards. We'll deploy our emergency response team immediately, Nasbaroth announced. Your team isn't trained for Earth's polar conditions, came the reply from Earth Command. We're dispatching a specialized rescue unit from Van Richter Academy. They're requesting permission to rendezvous with your vessel for transport to the site. Nasbaroth's spots flickered in confusion. You're sending cadets? Juveniles? They're our most qualified Alpine rescue unit, regardless of age. Time is critical, Inspector. Within 30 minutes, a shuttle docked with the regulatory compliance carrying 10 cadets and 2 adult instructors. The cadets moved with practiced efficiency, unloading specialized equipment and reviewing topographical data of the outpost. Inspector, the leader cadet greeted Nasbaroth briskly. Thank you for the transport assistance. We'll need to deploy within the hour before conditions worsen. Nasbaroth was taken aback by the transformation. Gone was the polite, diplomatic student from the interview. This young human was now clearly in operational mode, coordinating the rescue effort with authority and precision. You expect us to allow untrained juveniles to undertake this dangerous mission? Tikal demanded. One of the adult instructors stepped forward. With respect, these cadets have over 200 combined hours of Arctic rescue training. They're certified in crevasse extraction, medical emergency response, and extreme weather operations. They're not untrained. They're specialists. Nasbaroth's inspection team had little choice. The storm was worsening and the trapped researchers had perhaps 4 hours of oxygen remaining. They accompanied the rescue team to monitor the operation. The conditions at the research outpost were harrowing. Winds exceeding 120 kilometers per hour drove snow and ice horizontally across the landscape. Temperatures had plummeted to -70 degrees Celsius. The facility's main dome had partially collapsed, and the entrance was blocked by debris. The cadets moved with surprising synchronization, establishing a base camp and communications relay before tackling the entrance. They worked methodically, using specialized equipment to cut through metal and reinforce unstable sections. "They appear quite proficient," Vex noted, watching from the relative safety of the shuttle. "Being good at something doesn't make it legal," Nesboroth replied, though their spots flickered with what might have been reluctant admiration. When the entrance was cleared, the cadets split into teams, 2 to maintain the exit path, 4 to locate and extract the researchers, and 4 to stabilize critical systems. The inspector team followed the extraction team into the facility. Inside, conditions were chaotic. Power fluctuated, causing emergency lights to strobe erratically. The temperature differential had created patches of dangerous ice on floors and walls. Structural integrity warnings blared from steel-demolishing systems. The cadets moved through this environment with focused calm, using thermal scanners to locate the life signs of the trapped researchers. They found them in a sealed laboratory that had become an improvised shelter. Among the researchers were 2 Vrul scientists, whose exoskeletons had begun to harden dangerously in the cold. A Geed researcher was suffering from atmospheric deprivation that caused their bioluminescent spots to dim ominously. The cadets immediately began treatment, administering species-appropriate emergency care with unexpected expertise. "You know Vrul physiology?" Vex asked in surprise, as a cadet applied a thermal regulator to the Vrul researcher's thorax. "Xenobiology is a core subject," the cadet replied, not looking up from their work. "We study all Concordat species' emergency medical needs." As they stabilized the researchers for transport, part of the ceiling gave way. Without hesitation, one of the cadets shoved Tikal out of the collapse zone, taking a glancing blow from falling debris in the process. "Are you injured?" Call asked, gill flaps pulsating in concern. The cadet winced, clearly in pain, but continued preparing a researcher for evacuation. "I'm functional. We need to move now. Structural integrity is failing faster than predicted." The evacuation proceeded with only minutes to spare before the facility suffered a catastrophic collapse. Back aboard the regulatory compliance, the researchers received advanced medical care, while the cadets debriefed their instructors with detailed technical analyses of what had gone wrong and how future responses could be improved. Nesboroth observed this process with increasingly conflicted feelings. These were clearly not ordinary students, but neither were they quite soldiers. They had just executed a dangerous rescue mission with precision and professionalism that many adult military units would struggle to match. The Concordat Compliance Committee convened an emergency session to hear the inspection team's report. Representatives from all 17 species attended, many with expressions of concern, or whatever passed for concern among species whose facial features included mandibles, beaks, or gelatinous sensory bulbs. Nesboroth delivered a carefully worded summary of their findings, highlighting both the clear military aspects of the cadets' training and the undeniable humanitarian applications demonstrated during the rescue. "The human cadet system exists in a regulatory gray area," they concluded. "These juveniles are receiving what is unquestionably military-adjacent training, yet they are not deployed in combat and serve important non-military functions." Ambassador Zixtarl's eye stalks vibrated with frustration. "This is precisely the kind of loophole the statute was designed to prevent. They are training their young for war while claiming its education." The human representative stood. "With respect, Ambassador, our cadets just saved the lives of 6 Concordat researchers, including members of your own species. They did so not because they're soldiers, but because they're trained to help others, a value we believe transcends age." "A compelling performance," Zixtarl conceded, "but one rescue mission doesn't negate the military nature of their training." Vex unexpectedly raised a limb to speak. My analysis suggests the humans have identified a fundamental flaw in our statute. We sought to prevent the exploitation of juveniles in warfare, but we failed to consider whether military training itself is inherently exploitative. The chamber fell silent. The cadets we observed, Vex continued, were not coerced conscripts. They were eager students, receiving advanced education and developing valuable skills. Their training, while military in nature, also prepared them for humanitarian service, as demonstrated in Antarctica. DeCall spoke next. I must note that a cadet risked their own safety to protect me during the rescue. This suggests their training emphasizes the protection of life rather than its elimination. Murmurs spread through the committee as representatives conferred with their delegations. Zixtarl's eye stalks drooped slightly. Are you suggesting we amend the statute? I suggest we reconsider its purpose, Nosboroth replied. The statute exists to protect juvenile beings from exploitation and the horrors of war. But what if some forms of military training actually serve to protect juveniles and others? The human representative suppressed what might have been a smirk. We would welcome a more nuanced statute that focuses on the exploitation and deployment of juveniles in actual combat, while recognizing the educational value of structured training programs. Ambassador Zixtarl was not quite ready to concede. This creates a dangerous precedent. Other species could establish similar programs and claim they're also just cadets. Perhaps, the human agreed, but they would be subject to the same scrutiny and standards. Any program that genuinely protects its juveniles while preparing them for service, military or otherwise, should be evaluated on its merits. The debate continued for hours, but a clear consensus began to emerge. The Concordat would establish a new regulatory framework, distinguishing between exploitative child soldiery and structured cadet programs with appropriate safeguards. As the session concluded, Nosboroth approached the human representative in the corridor outside. You planned this all along, didn't you? They asked, spots flickering with grudging respect. You knew we'd find the academies questionable, so you arranged for us to see the cadets in a humanitarian role. The human's expression remained diplomatically neutral. Inspector, I assure you we had no way of predicting the Antarctic emergency. Of course not, Nosboroth replied dryly. Just as I'm sure it's pure coincidence that humans have a remarkable talent for finding exactly the right emergency to showcase their particular skills. The universe works in mysterious ways. Indeed it does, Nosboroth conceded, though I suspect it works most mysteriously when humans are involved. 6 standard months later, the amended Statute 7B 0.3.1 was formally adopted by the Concordat General Assembly. The Human Exception Clause, as it was informally known throughout galactic diplomatic circles, created a regulatory framework distinguishing between exploitative military conscription and structured educational programs with security applications. The debate had been fierce. The Vrul conservatives had argued that any military training of juveniles was inherently corrupting. The Tasari moderates suggested a case-by-case evaluation system. The Gede pragmatists proposed quantifiable metrics to distinguish acceptable from unacceptable programs. In the end, the humans had somehow convinced everyone to adopt a 294-page regulatory framework that was simultaneously stringent enough to prevent actual exploitation and flexible enough to permit virtually everything humans were already doing. The document was a masterpiece of bureaucratic engineering. Dense, circular, and peppered with just enough exceptions to make universal enforcement practically impossible. At the formal signing ceremony, Ambassador Zixtarl cornered Admiral Chen, who had been appointed as Earth's special envoy for youth education policy. I must congratulate you, Zixtarl said, eye stalks vibrating with what might have been amusement or indigestion. You've managed to legalize what we initially came to prohibit and convinced us it was our idea. Admiral Chen smiled with practiced diplomacy. Not at all, Ambassador. We've simply reached a more nuanced understanding that protects vulnerable juveniles while respecting educational autonomy. Everyone wins. Indeed. Though I can't help noticing that Earth now hosts 6 new cultural exchange programs in which young Vrul, Tasari, and even Jeed are participating in your cadet training. Knowledge sharing is the foundation of interspecies cooperation, the Admiral replied smoothly. We're simply offering our allies the benefit of our educational methodologies. Zixteral's eye stalks drooped slightly. And I suppose the fact that these exchange students will return to their home worlds thoroughly versed in human military thinking and tactics is merely an educational bonus? Ambassador, you wound me. We're teaching leadership, crisis management, and cross-species cooperation, vital diplomatic skills. Of course, Zixteral gurgled sarcastically. Just as your new orbital defense network is merely a weather monitoring system with incidental military applications. Elsewhere in the galaxy, the ripple effects of the human exception clause were already being felt. The Braxi hegemony, a non-Concordat power with expansionist tendencies, abruptly scaled back operations along the border of human space. Their intelligence services had reported a troubling development. Humans weren't just training their own juveniles in military arts, they were now training the juveniles of their allies as well. The implications were strategically significant. Within a generation, the Concordat's officer corps would be populated by individuals who had trained alongside humans from adolescence, creating bonds of loyalty and shared experience that transcended species. The humans weren't just building an army, they were building a multi-species coalition, bound together by shared formative experiences. On Earth, at Van Richter Academy, the first cohort of non-human cadets was adjusting to their new environment with varying degrees of success. The Vrul struggled with Earth's gravity, but excelled in theoretical orbital mechanics. The Tasari dominated aquatic exercises, but required special accommodations for high-altitude training. The Jeed consistently outperformed everyone in mathematical calculations, but found human concepts of physical courage bewilderingly reckless. Inspector Naz Baroth, now appointed as the Concordat's special observer for cadet exchange programs, watched a mixed-species group tackle the infamous obstacle course. The human instructors had modified it to accommodate the physiological differences of each species, creating challenges that played to different strengths and forced cadets to rely on each other. Ingenious, murmured Vex, who had joined the oversight committee as the Vrul representative. They've turned the training into an exercise in interspecies cooperation. Yes, Nazbaroth agreed, their bioluminescent spots flickering thoughtfully. The humans claim these programs build mutual understanding and prevent conflict. And do you believe them? Nazbaroth watched as a human cadet helped a struggling Vrul navigate a vertical climb, while a Tasari cadet used their superior strength to stabilize a platform for others to cross. I believe they genuinely value these outcomes, Nazbaroth replied carefully. But I also believe humans never do anything for just one reason. You think they have military motives. I think they're preparing for something, Nazbaroth said. Not necessarily war, but something. The humans have a saying that caught my attention. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. A pessimistic philosophy, or a realistic one. The galaxy is vast and largely unknown. The humans seem uniquely preoccupied with what might be waiting beyond the Concordat's borders. 6 more months passed, and the Concordat Compliance Committee convened a special session to review the cadet exchange programs. The data was undeniable. Incidents of interspecies conflict had decreased by 32% among worlds participating in the exchanges. Diplomatic cooperation metrics showed marked improvement. Joint scientific ventures had increased exponentially. The programs were, by every measurable standard, a resounding success. Yet beneath the data lay a subtler reality that few non-humans recognized. Earth wasn't just training allies, it was reshaping the Concordat's understanding of military readiness. The concepts of civilian and military were being deliberately blurred into a continuum rather than distinct categories. Emergency response, disaster management, scientific research, and military operations were being integrated into a unified approach to existential challenges. The humans had a word for this that didn't translate well: resilience. As Masboroth completed their final report on the first year of exchange programs, they included an observation that would be largely overlooked by the committee, but would eventually prove prophetic. Humans appear to be preparing not merely for conflict, but for survival, not just their own, but that of all sentient life. Their obsession with training their young, and now the young of other species, may reflect an understanding of cosmic vulnerability that the Concordat has yet to fully appreciate. Perhaps we should be less concerned with whether humans are creating soldiers, and more interested in what enemy they believe we may one day face. The report was filed, catalogued, and promptly buried under 17 layers of bureaucratic classification. The cadet programs expanded, more species joined. The human exception clause became standard practice rather than controversial anomaly. And somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of the Galactic Concordat, a new form was being prepared in triplicate, coffee was growing cold, and the meeting to discuss the amendment was already running exactly 17 minutes too long. But this time, seated among the bureaucrats, were graduates of Earth's cadet programs: Vrool, Tessari, Jeed, and others. Their perspectives forever altered by their training alongside humans. They didn't see child soldiers when they looked at cadets. They saw the future of the galaxy, preparing for challenges yet unknown. They were just cadets, and perhaps that would be enough.